I think we're all warm and safe.
Good. Hello, Dr. Banner.
Hi, Ed.
Welcome. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Glenda, wave your hand. This is our president, Glenda Summers. Glenda, wave your hand at Dr. Banner. There you go. Okay.
Hi there.
Okay.
Dr. Banner, I wanted to ask you, I've changed the agenda a little bit because people want me to do the announcements before the program. Will that be okay with you? In other words, instead of you starting at 12:45, you would start at probably about 5 till 1. So just change the order a little bit. Will that interfere with your schedule?
Well, we had been emailing about this morning, right?
Oh,
And
right.
I was told the announcements would come first, and
Mhm.
that the announcements would be done by 12:50. So I was planning on a 40-minute talk and question and answer period.
Well,
So-
I'll make my intro very short.
okay. Well,
So if now it's changing to 12:55, then I have 35 minutes total for the talk and Q&A. Is that right?
And then
Because I was told 40 before. So just tell me so I can plan accordingly.
Well,
see, some of our people have to go back to work. So what we thought is you could be our speaker, and then some of the people, could stay around for question and answer if we have to close out for the people who need to leave and go back to work.
Right. Yeah, I've got a job too. So it's all good.
Oh, okay.
Just tell me the total amount of time so I can plan. I don't want to run over. I don't want to crowd. I want to just fit, but just let me know the parameters and I'll do my best to stick to them.
well,
Okay, go
well,
ahead.
Linda, let's say that he can start no later than 12:55, and maybe the announcements won't take quite as long.
Okay, so you want, okay, I'll make some, I will make the announcement short. Okay,
Okay, good idea.
okay, all right. Okay,
And we can I do a quick test to see if you can see my screen if I share it.
Sure.
Can you see the screen?
Yes,
Okay, great.
perfect.
I'm all set.
yes, Robert has a question to ask. What?
And
Yes.
this would be directed to you. I think you'd have an answer for it. With regards to the leadership, of the Texas Leadership Forum,
Yes.
it was identified that it starts about 11 o'clock on Friday, I think,
No, it
And
starts on
Saturday.
Saturday.
and then is over by
Noon Sunday.
Well,
about,
they have a luncheon on Sunday and then it's over.
oh, I see. Okay, one lunch. What about Saturday? Is it a dinner there or a lunch or?
Saturday, you get a lunch and a dinner, and then Sunday you get breakfast and lunch.
Oh, okay.
See,
Gotcha.
none of that was on the sign up form, so I was very confused about what time it ended on Friday, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Saturday. So, okay. All right. Thank you. Well, Leonore is supposed to be the host today. Do you, Leonore, are you here? Are you on?
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, okay, good. good.
It's not 12:30 yet.
Oh. Hey, I like that. That's a good picture. I like that.
Yes.
Thank you.
How's your weather there, Leonore?
It's better than yours. We're in the 80s.
Oh, wow.
Not bad.
Any of you, rest of you experienced any power outages or power interruptions this morning?
I didn't.
We've had 2 out here, but they're very short duration.
Oh, my.
Oh, man.
That's scary.
Mm.
Well, most of it is the ice accumulation on the power lines.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
and on the trees that are hanging over power lines that cause them to short out. But fortunately, their recovery is very fast.
Good.
Oh, yeah.
At least the two we've had so far is.
Mm.
Well, JP, we won't have to worry about auctioning roses because we can't deliver them, so there's no use auctioning them.
Mm.
Very, very good. I'll understand that.
Yeah. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Glenda. Hey, folks, can you hear me okay? I'm on my
Oh, yeah.
phones.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and tilt it. I don't know if that makes it worse. Well, it's just,
You just
it's easier to see y'all that way, so I don't know if that,
You just look wider.
I just look, yeah, I know, exactly.
Uh-huh.
Could all use some of that right now.
And when we start the program, would you lead the pledge today for us?
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll put my glasses on so you can see the ring light on my eyes and make me look like a space alien. So there you go. That's even better. Let's see. Yeah, I'll just leave it off. Do one thing here. Let's see. Okay, cool. All right, good.
Okay.
wow.
Now I can see everybody. I put it on full. Okay.
Let's start. It's 12:30.
All right. Well, I'm going to call to order the oldest Lions Club in the world. Let's stand if you can, and we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance and the flag to the Texas and the pledge to the Texas flag.
I don't have the flags to put up, so I'm sure you know the pledge of allegiance for sure, at least.
Yes.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And then we'll honor the Texas flag. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible. Yeehaw.
Okay, thank you.
Well done.
Yes.
Thank you, Mark.
so much. Okay, do we have any guests today that need to be introduced? Does anybody have a guest today?
We have our speaker, but I'll introduce him later.
Okay, great. Yes. Okay. All right. And
We don't have
I
a
don't see-
guest, so to speak, but I see Ann is joining us today. Hi, Ann. Oh, she was there and now she's gone.
Oh.
Guess I shouldn't have said anything.
Ha!
Oh. And I don't have any birthdays. I didn't see any birthdays. Have I missed anybody? Any birthdays this week? Okay. Well, then it's time for us to have our announcements. We're going to have our announcements and then our program. I wanted to tell you that casino night is still on track. We've been having a meeting every Friday night to discuss things. We're looking for more sponsors for game tables, and those are $500. And then we want to sell some more tickets. And if you have any questions, need some tickets, the person to talk to is Patty. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, then I wanted to report on the midwinter conference in Hutto that Ann and Robert and I went to. It was very interesting, very enlightening. I think I learned a lot. And I'm happy to say that we received a Club Excellent patch to put on our banner. And I'm really happy to have that. What that means basically is you have to have increased your membership in order to get this. So we did increase our membership last year under really tough times, and I'm very, very proud of us. So this is a patch to put onto the banner. And then we have a patch for our past president. A pin for a past president that said Club Excellence on it. So thank y'all for helping out with that. Oh, and one more thing is I took, remember our speaker last week with the Austin Angels, who did such a good job. When we went to the meeting in Hutto, the Hutto Leos had all of these stuffed animals. I came back with a huge box of stuffed animals, probably about 4 by 5, huge box. And I've talked to them, and I'm going to get with the Austin Angels so that they can distribute these to the children. And I was very, very pleased with that. So
Trying to
excited.
get on a Zoom meeting for Lions and I can't get any audio. I'm trying to get on a Lions meeting and I can't get any audio.
We can hear you, Ann.
Oh, maybe, yeah, I know what I can do.
Oh,
We can hear you.
okay. I wanted to tell you that we have ordered the bench, and we voted, and it's going to be a pretty green color, and it's going to be by the Playscape in Zilker Park. And Tommy Cowan has been working very hard getting the approval and everything that we needed to put it there. So we're moving forward, and I think it's going to be really, really exciting. And thank y'all for all that you did to make the bench a possibility way ahead of time. And then Steve Riley is going to talk to us about reporting service hours. Steve?
Yes, Glenda, thank you for that. And I hope you folks are all doing well and you're warm and safe. And we just found out that school is canceled again tomorrow for Leander ISD. I'm thinking it's going to be that way for all the schools. So I wanted to share with you folks, I'm planning to roll out a service form that I think should be user-friendly and easy to do. I wanted to just kind of give folks an idea of what to expect. So I'm going to flip my camera around right quick. When I go on to the Lions, this is what I see, the different past activities, either report past activities, reported activities. And so my goal is to get all activity from 7/1/2021, last July, through December 31st. That'll enable us to get current on all of the activities that we're needing to report. And I grabbed screenshots. Typically, I added this one, which is eyeglass recycling. I'm going to do weekly meetings. I'm doing that based on number of participants on Zoom calls and averaging out the number and then getting an aggregate. It's a clean, easy way to do it. My plan 2 was to bundle some of this because we have donations to individual elementary schools and whatnot. I was going to do school donations as one category, and I was going to do Meals on Wheels as one category as well. So my plan is to try to get a little more simplicity to it. Not that it wasn't done well before, but just in the interest of trying to catch us up and get us set up on time. I'm going to add the Trek plastic recycling, the 2021 clay shoot. And I apologize. I know you gave us great reportage on that, but I'd love to visit with you offline and just get funds raised and whatnot. So, and I'm adding Patty's Leo's activity. And when I send this out, I'm going to flip this camera back real quick. What I'm trying to do is just get us to get these hours reported and posted. And if there's any categories that you folks want to add, you can certainly do that. A couple of people have already just said to me, hey, Steve, this is what I've done. These are my hours. I'm fully welcome to receiving that as informally and as quickly as possible. So I wanted to share that with everybody. Sorry for the delay, but I want to build something that we can just easily fill in. So we're going to cover basically the first 6 months of this fiscal year through the end of December. And then I'm going to check in with you folks at towards the middle of March to check in on Q1 for 2022. Does that sound good?
Sounds
Any
great.
questions? Yeah.
Beverly, you're muted if you have a question.
I'm muted.
No, click it again. You're still muted.
I'm muted.
Nope, not now.
Beverly, for some reason, you're still muted. I don't know what's, Leonore, can you help her with
Could you
that?
add eye screening?
Yes, sorry, eye screening for sure. And forgive me, I wanted to just explain what I was doing was trying to take our recurring events like vision screening, Meals on Wheels, the elementary school donations, things that we've historically done, and certainly, grandfather those in as categories, but just try to consolidate them a little, if we can do that. So, and then adding any new things. So the Trek recycling, the bench recycling was certainly a new endeavor for us this year. And Patty, thank you for that reportage on the Leos. If there's any and forgive my ignorance, but if there's any other folks within the club that have any other Leos activities that I'm not aware of, that would be helpful to add that too. So I'm trying to basically, get us the credit for the hours we've put in and try to make the reportage as easy as possible. So I was going to.
Good job.
Oh, am I? Oh, God bless you. That's great. I'll send you a second check for that. Thank you, Beverly.
Hey,
She and I
Steve,
timed it. While she was muted, we were, chatting and timing all that out.
Oh, okay.
Look normal.
Steve, this is Mark.
Yeah,
I just
please.
wonder where my check is. Hey, I have just a real quick question on eyeglasses recycling. When people go to, they pick up eyeglasses at the collection boxes that are out there.
Yeah.
Do we accumulate is that the time it takes to drive there, or how do you want that reported?
Yeah, I mean, here's my theory anyway. And again, I'm still very new to all of this, but if I'm getting in a car and I'm driving to a Vision Works or one of these other places, I'm spending that time to, procure those eyeglasses, and then I'm driving back, we'll call that an hour and a half or whatever. I would add that as service because we're obviously, we're doing that. And then certainly the sorting and whatnot. And my now 10-year-old, he started this as an 8-year-old going on a 9-year-old, my 10-year-old service. I'll bundle it in with mine, and he won't get credit. And he'll get used to learning that life isn't fair, which is good. So.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Steve Gaylord here.
Yes.
This is for calendar year 2021, right?
And yes, Gaylord, and specifically from July 1st to the end of December 2021, if possible. So,
well, that's
so
just 6 months.
Yeah. Well, and the reason being is I think there was reportage already done for the first 6 months of 2021. Certainly, if there's anything that y'all want to add from the first 6 months, just maybe separately list that, and I can add that. I can edit.
Clarify, our reporting is done on the fiscal year from July 1 to June 30.
That's correct. That's correct. So my role as service chair commenced on July 1. So if you look down here, you'll see that there's already reported activities that occurred, through the end of June 2021. So, like for example, this Pickle Elementary was May 7th of 2021. But Gaylord, if you have any activity, before July 1 that you want to report, I can certainly chat with you offline and figure that out creatively. Again, without, breaking any laws or any of that stuff or any windows or anything. So,
well, there was, but I just, if there's duplication, I guess there's a way to check. I hate for you to have to go to that trouble to see if there's duplicated reporting.
Right. And I think that's the key too, is to try to get it to where, look, the whole goal is for us to get out there and keep moving and keep serving. So
that's we're sensitive to time today. Might I suggest, Steve, you just put together your reporting mechanism. Perfect. And send us some instructions of what you'd like to include in it, and we can all read through that and do as you instruct.
That's perfect. JP, I appreciate that guidance. That's what I needed, an editor. If I had that in high school, I'd be a different man right now. So thank you for that. So I appreciate that. I'm done.
Okay, well, I think we want to move on. I'm so looking forward to our speaker. I know we're going to have a lot of questions, and it looks like we're getting you started right on time, Dr. Banner. And Ann, would you introduce Dr. Banner to us?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. very quickly, I want to tell you, Dr. Banner is the, just a minute, let me find, F.M. Bullard Professor in the Jackson School of Geosciences and the Director of the Environmental Science Institute at UT Austin. I heard Dr. Banner speak at the OLLI about a year ago, and having grown up in West Texas and knowing how precious water is, I was very, very interested in his topic. And I thought at the time, this is something that members of the Lions Club will be very interested in hearing. And we kind of are having a climate event today, so it's kind of timely that we're going to talk about moisture, because we're glad to be getting what we have. And just as a reminder, be sure that everyone except our speaker is muted. And then when he's done with the presentation, we will open it up for questions. So with that, I encourage you to read the full bio that was with the meeting notice. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jay Banner.
All right, thank you, Ann. I assume everyone can hear me and see my screen. Let me know if otherwise. Appreciate that introduction, Ann. And yes, here I am. I'm going to talk to you today. It's 27 degrees outside, and I'm going to talk to you about global warming. So there's a little bit of irony there. But I would like to discuss with you today. Let me go into full slide mode here. As the title says, I'd like to talk to you about climate change in Texas and using the perspective of multiple timescales. A key result that I will describe today is that Texas's climate is already changing and will continue to change this century in unprecedented ways, in ways that we have not seen looking back through the past and looking at the present. All right, so yeah, I want to thank the Austin Founder Lions Club for the invitation to speak here and doing a little research to see what your club was all about. I see that it's really nothing but hijinks is all you guys are up to. And I have to say today, I'm sorry, it's just going to be a little bit more serious than perhaps what you normally do, dancing and singing. And I'll just point out the impressive hipster facial hair that apparently some of your members have. All right, well, now down to serious business. So this is just an outline of what I would like to chat with you about, the predictions of climate science based on a warmer atmosphere. So I just want to start with, in general, the most general sense, what we know about the physics of the climate system. And then I want to hone in on this part of the world here in Texas and talk about this concept of the 100th meridian climate boundary, which I'll define. And then we'll talk about how we might reconstruct climate in the past and project future climate change going forward. I'm sorry, I'm hearing a little bit of noise. Not sure why or what, but anyway. And then I'll talk about Texas climate change and population change and its impacts on water resources, and end with talking about science and policy of climate change, an example from Texas. And I'll give you a disclaimer right up front. I'm not a policy expert. I'm not a political scientist. I don't have a law degree. My background is in science, but I've been brought into the policy arena as a result of the need for information about climate science. So time permitting, I'll share that with you as well. So my takeaways are that Texas's climate has changed in the past and is projected to change in ways we have not seen before during this 21st century. And at the same time, the state's population is going to double. And so that is going to drive synergistic impacts on our water resources, our energy sector, health, food economy, social equity. It will have very significant impacts. And we'll talk about what our state is or isn't doing to plan for this, and share my opinions about the fact that we're going to have to approach things in new ways in terms of research, education, policy, economy, in order to address these challenges that we face. Right on. So, as I said, I'd like to start with, what does climate science predict will be consequences of having a warmer and warming atmosphere? Okay, it is now an established fact that climate has been warming, the atmosphere has been warming all the models project that it will continue to warm. So it behooves us to ask, what's the basic physics of what will happen if the atmosphere continues to warm as all models project and all science projects will happen? And what I'm going to share with you are tenets from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is an international body of scientists, engineers, policy experts, all getting together, over 1,000 people every 5 years or so, the leading experts in the world getting together to assess the state of knowledge. And the fourth National Climate Assessment is also where some of this comes from. And that also puts out a report every several years, just like the Global International Governmental Panel on Climate Change. The US Fourth National Climate Assessment gets together about every 4 or 5 years. I was part of that assessment. It wasn't over 1,000 people. There were 300 co-authors I had on that. So let me just go through some of these basics here. So if the atmosphere warms, that's going to warm the oceans. As the oceans warm, just like any body of water, the warmer it gets, the more evaporation there will be, right? That's just physics. If there's more water vapor, therefore, in the atmosphere, because of more evaporation from the oceans, that will lead, all of the things being equal, which they're not always, but it will lead to more intense rain events. By the same token, as the atmosphere warms, the land surface warms. As the land surface warms, there's more evaporation over land. And as we lose the moisture on the land surface and in soil, the soil moisture is lost, that will lead to longer and more intense droughts, and to droughts that we would ordinarily not have, just because of that effect of the increased evaporation due to a warmer atmosphere. The atmosphere warms, as we said, the surface of the ocean warms, and the surface of the ocean, that temperature at the surface of the ocean, you can think about that as sort of the engine room for tropical storms and hurricanes. The warmer the ocean surface, this is again, a simple thermodynamic model tells us the warmer the surface of the oceans, the more intense the energy will be in a given storm or hurricane that will be spun up from that ocean surface. All right, so just to step back and say, this is all about the laws of physics, which are been proven time and again. This is all about things that have been demonstrated in laboratory benchtop experiments, on theoretical scales, on model scales, on field scales, right? These are not laws of physics that are currently under debate or discussion or anything like that. These are the most sound projections we can make given our state of knowledge. All right, so given that template, I'll now ask you to consider what North America looks like from space. So I'm going to ask each of you, in your mind's eye, conjure up an image. And you could do this best by closing your eyes and imagine you're flying the space shuttle, right? And you're flying it like they do, upside down and looking down at the Earth. And what does North America look like in your mind? Or maybe you're Sandra Bullock in that movie Gravity. She played an astronaut. She was hanging off of a satellite or something, and she was looking down at the Earth, right? What does North America look like? So I'll just wait for you all to close your eyes and conjure up an image. All right. Does it look something like this? What we can see here? And can you also see my cursor as I move it around? Right. This is, you probably all came up with something like this, right? Because this composite satellite image shows us what we all intuitively know. The southeast part of the United States is humid. The vegetation is lush and green. The southwest part of the United States is arid. The vegetation is not so green or even completely absent. And there seems to be a dividing line somewhere right down the middle of North America that runs pretty close to where we are. Where are we on this? Well, I'm just going to trace out a couple of prominent features on the landscape here. This is IH-35. It's actually the Balcones Escarpment that IH-35 runs along. And this is the meandering Colorado River. And so right here, X marks the spot of Austin, Texas. Right here is where we are. And you have to go a little bit further west out around San Angelo to where we would get to perhaps where people have actually named this boundary. The proposition is it's right around 100 degrees west longitude, or what's also known as the 100th meridian, has been proposed a long time ago by a really sharp geologist that this is the boundary between this humid southeast and arid southwest US. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But I also want to illustrate on here why Texas is in what we call a climatological bittersweet spot. There's a lot of convergence of climatological phenomenon in this region, right? So here in Central Texas, we're right on the edge of the arid Southwest US, which is a very drought-prone region. So Texas all the way through Central Texas and beyond is prone to these extended droughts. That's one climate risk factor we face. The other fact is that Texas is right on the Gulf Coast, right? And the Gulf of Mexico, with its warm ocean surface temperatures, is actually the spawning ground for a lot of tropical storms and hurricanes, a lot of them making landfall on the Texas coast. So we kind of have the impact of two separate, very separate climate phenomenon right here in Central Texas. So what will happen here in Texas in terms of climate change, we'll probably feel it sooner, bigger than many other parts of the world. So now I want to focus in on Texas, this region right here. We're going to zoom in and look at some satellite data. And here you can see the outline of Texas and the Gulf Coast here. These are satellite data, and the data have been computed to actually give us information about vegetation health. So using the satellite data, where the colors are green, the vegetation is healthy. Where the colors are brown, the vegetation is not doing so well. And where the image is white, the vegetation is absent. Okay, so this is the end of August 2010. And you can see sort of this gradient, right? And that 100th meridian comes right down here. And it's actually nailed pretty well, wasn't it? And you'll see who nailed it a long time ago. It's pretty impressive that this really seems to be a close-up of this wet, dry boundary. Now what I'm going to do is roll the clock forward a full year. We're going to look at the end of August 2011, and we're going to look at the same kind of data for this region. Wow, that's pretty dramatic, isn't it? And even though you're all muted, I can actually visibly see your mouth go agape at just how staggering this is, right? So this is a movement of that wet, dry boundary dramatically to the east. We could look at it again. It's really staggering, isn't it? I could do this all day. And I have till, 1:30? I could do this just from now until 1:30. I'll just keep doing this, and I'll just talk about other stuff. No, I'm kidding, and all kidding aside, right? This is pretty serious stuff. We'll talk a little bit about what some of the impacts were economically, as well as to our water resources in the state of this drought in 2011, which lasted about 3 years. What I'm going to submit to you is that this boundary has moved in the past for much longer periods of time than 3 years. And it's projected to move in the future for periods of time much longer than 3 years. But this is the context of our recent history of the droughts that we have experienced. All right. So John Wesley Powell is the person pictured here on the right, and he coined the term 100th meridian. He was a professor of geosciences at Illinois Wesleyan University back in the late 1800s. But if you tried to go see him during his office hours, he was almost never there. Why? He was often exploring the Western US, making geologic maps, taking stock of what water resources existed. And he did this on horseback. He was also the first person to lead a research trip down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. And he explored the Western US and came up with this warning that this 100th meridian is not sufficient to really plan for extensive development of land west of it, right? He warned against developing the land in the Western United States because he didn't think there was enough water to support it. But imagine that. He came up with this image of this boundary, and he drew that line that I just showed you from satellite. Pretty sure there were no satellites back in the 1800s. Pretty sure there was no internet. And he was able to still come up with this very large scale and important perspective. So he would talk with Congress or whoever would listen and say things publicly like, you're piling up a heritage of conflict and litigation over water rights because there's just not enough water to supply the land. He said that in 1883. Unfortunately, as we know, a lot of that land has been developed and are facing water crises today, whether it's that mecca of Western civilization, Las Vegas, large cities in Arizona, Southern California, are all being built out and continue to be built out in spite of such warnings. And as in short, Dr. Powell was not listened to. There was a much stronger vested interest on the part of the railroad companies, which had been given hundreds of millions of acres of land in exchange for building the railroads. So they had a very strong interest in seeing that land develop because the value of the railroads would only go higher and higher. Well, at least we could say, here we are 150 years later, and maybe we could take some comfort in knowing is that no longer can large corporations have undue influence on how land is used in this country. That was said with some sarcasm, so I'll step back from that, and now I'll tell you a little bit more about John Wesley Powell. He was kind of a Renaissance man. He was the founder and first director of the U.S. Bureau of Ethnology. He was the second director of the U.S. Geological Survey. He was an officer in the Civil War. He lost his right arm when in the Battle of Shiloh, he was giving his troops the order to charge, and he took on some musket fire, and he wound up having his right arm amputated, as you can see here. He sat out for a while. Get this, he re-upped, he re-enlisted, he became an officer again, and there he was in the siege of Vicksburg, hunkered down in the trenches, and like any good geoscientist, while he was now ducking that musket fire, he was studying the stratigraphy, the strata on the walls of the trenches that had been dug to protect them. As I said, he was a Renaissance man. If you want to be fashion forward, I would look at what he was doing back then, and probably it's going to come into vogue, right? You can look at that hipster facial hair, more impressive than any picture I've seen on Founder Lion's website. And I think the next thing that's going to be very fashion forward are these pants, where the belt line is 14 inches above the belly button. So if I were you, I would try to find those and buy them up pretty soon. Okay, but enough of me and my apparent obsession with John Wesley Powell. Let's move on. So we proposed to the National Science Foundation doing a study of water availability in the future in this region, and we called it the new 100th meridian, ? Right? Where will the position of the new 100th meridian be? As I said, there's evidence that it moved in the past, not just in 2011, but at other times for more extended periods of time. And what will happen if that moves? Right? So it's not the line of longitude moving, right? That's stuck. It's the euphemistic use of the term the 100th meridian as the wet-dry boundary. That's what will be moving, and that's what has moved in the past. So what you could see here, if the 100th meridian does move again to the east, that wet-dry boundary, look at all these grayed out areas. All these are counties with greater than 75% population growth by 2050, from 2010 to 2050. All right. What's being proposed here is that there'll be a doubling of population of Texas by around mid-century. That's a staggering amount of increase in population. What that means is that the demand for water will go way up. At the same time, if the 100th meridian boundary moves, look at all those major cities where the demographers tell us almost all the new Texans will be moving into cities, and cities will be expanding, existing cities, including the Rio Grande Valley, San Antonio, San Marcos, which at one time a few years ago led the US in rate of population growth, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth. This whole line of these major urban centers are lying in wait for the shift of the 100th meridian to the east. We'll see a confluence of rapid rise in water demand and rapid fall in water availability. That is not a sustainable situation that we face. So let's talk a little bit generically now about how we assess climate change through time. When we look at present climate, we call that the instrumental record. That's when we've had thermometers, rain gauges. That goes back to about 1900. Before then, the instruments weren't very good. People didn't keep very careful records. People didn't worry about changing climate. They didn't think to write it down. They had more important things, more pressing matters at the time to take care of. So we need something before the instrumental record to serve as a proxy, like a proxy vote if you're not going to be around. What serves as a proxy for before we had these instrumental records? And there's a whole bunch of things. I'm just going to tell you today mostly about tree rings, okay, and how they could tell us about past climate change. And when we talk about future climate, we talk about model simulations. So these are complex numerical codes, often run on supercomputers. And what they do is simulate how the atmosphere circulates, how the atmosphere interacts with the land surface, with the ocean surface, and using the laws of physics, using the laws of chemistry, using the knowledge we have of the radiative forcing of greenhouse gases as we increase their concentration in the atmosphere, take all these things into account, and then you can project forward, like say, in 50 years, we will have double the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. That's one possible model. Run the model with that increasing CO2 in the atmosphere, and then see how temperature changes, see how the distribution of rainfall changes, etc. So that's how we project future climate, sort of like a weather forecast, but on a much longer time scale. All right, so given all of this, let's look at the way we use proxy records. So you probably all know how tree rings work, right? The oldest rings in the tree are in the middle, the youngest rings are at the margin, and this is simply just a cartoon of that. Now, in the next slide, I'm going to show you an actual record, a microscopic record of tree rings. That's what's shown here. In the lower left here is the oldest part of this stratigraphic record, if you will. The youngest part is in the upper right. I'm now going to make a traverse through this. And you tell me you want to stop when we get to the wettest part of the record. All right, so you can do that. I know you're muted. You could all raise your hand, tell me to stop when we get to the wettest part of the record that we're going through here. All right, well, I see about 10% participation. Out of those of you who participated, 100% correct answers. I'm going to extrapolate that everybody has that same level of knowledge as those of you who are more engaged and raised your hand. Awesome. We're going to move forward now. But yeah, simply, the tree rings can tell us paleo wetness or paleo dryness or droughts. When there are droughts, the rings are much closer together. Sometimes they're actually absent or missing, depending on how sensitive a particular species of tree is to drought. All right, so I'll be showing you some results for this. But first, I want to show you some projections as we go forward. That's the way we look in the past, the tree rings. Now let's look at these computer model simulations of climate change and for the Texas region. So this comes from the 4th National Climate Assessment, that document I told you about that I was one of the co-authors on. And these model projections are for the last decade of this century. And what's being shown here for Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas is the change in number of 100-degree days. So how many days a year will it be 100 degrees or higher? How many more of them will we have? All right, so let's go here to Central Texas. We're kind of in this color right here, which corresponds to this color. So somewhere in the 80s. So let's just call it, the projection says we're going to have about 80 days. Excuse me, I'm getting a low blood sugar alert, and I'm diabetic, so please forgive me if I'm going to eat some candy while I continue to talk. All right, thank you for your patience. So if we have 80 more days, does anybody know here in Central Texas about how many days of summer we have over 100 degrees or more? If you look at the last decade, it's about 40. We average about 40 of those a year. This means that by the late in this century, we'll have the 40 plus 80. That's 120 days. That's 4 months. 4 months of 100. I know now if it's like 3 days in a row where it's 100 or more, I go, that's miserable. I'm not going outside. I don't want to deal with that. All right, that's just my own personal discomfort, but it is a serious health issue as well in terms of heat-related illnesses. So where are we going to fit 120 days on our calendar? June, July, August, September. That means every single day of those months, it will be over 100 degrees. That's what we're facing. And this is in what we call the high carbon emissions scenario. So if we use fossil fuels and continue to burn carbon and put CO2 into the atmosphere at the rate we've been doing it, we are on this high carbon emissions scenario. Let me also show you data that was run in a model that used a low carbon emissions scenario. In other words, how do we go about obtaining a low carbon emissions scenario? Well, multinational accords, change in regulations, change in personal behavior. There's a number of ways that this could be achieved. If we do follow that pathway, look at that dramatic difference between the number of 100-degree days. There'll still be more, right? We're on a track to increase. The question is how steep is that slope? How rapidly, what rate are we increasing the atmospheric temperatures, right? I think what's really important takeaway for this is we often hear a lot of debate around climate change, global warming. Whose fault is it? What can we do about it? Is there anything we can do about it? Oftentimes you hear, you know what, forget it, we're screwed. We're on this path. There's really not much we could do to change the course of the future. So you might as well enjoy what you got while you're here, while you got it, right? That is a patently false statement. It could be someone's opinion. The opinion is not based on facts. You cannot say there's nothing we could do about this to make a change. Now you could have a discussion, how easy or how difficult will it be to achieve that, but you can't have a discussion that starts and ends with there's nothing we could do about it. That's what I think is important to take away from this. And I'll add, which of these two are we presently on? We are presently on this high carbon emission scenario, which is also known as the business as usual. If we continue to use energy, make energy, create energy the way we have been, this is the path that we're on. Okay, so this is an article I read several years back. I've read too many articles in my career as a researcher, but this was a rare one in that right in the title, it stopped me in my tracks. Which word do you think it was that stopped me in my tracks? I know you're all muted, so you could just hold up a number of fingers in which you tell me which word do you think really caught my attention, like no other of the words that were up there. 4, 1. Yeah, you're right, Ann. I know you're saying we're number one. Longhorns are number one. I know, and I say that all the time too. And we're really not athletically anyway. But you are right. It was that first word, unprecedented, because what really struck me is like that's almost being dramatic about it. Why it's unprecedented, the drought risk we're going to face. And scientists are usually cool, calculating, arm's length reviewers, arbiters of the data, rather than trying to inject drama into it. Depends on how you read it. So that really struck me. And that was, I'll show you the data on which this is based. So what do they mean by unprecedented drought risk for the 21st century for the Southwest and Central Plains? I'll show you data for the Southwest. And I was so motivated by this that a next study I was not part of this study, but a study that I was part of that looked at the same thing, but now just for Texas. And we found our results also showed there are unprecedented drought challenges for Texas water resources in a changing climate this century. Be happy to share with any of you the links to these studies. Okay, so let me show you the data on which these words were based. So this is the record of the last 1,000 years, the last 1,100 years, from the year 1000 AD to the year 2100, including the 21st century here. And on the y-axis is a drought index. On the x-axis is time. And this is for the Southwest US, which Texas is part of this study. And on the y-axis, again, on the right hand here, easy to see, dry is down, wet is up. Positive numbers means we had a relatively wet period. Negative numbers means we had a relatively dry period. Okay, everything we're looking at here in brown is based on tree rings. And then when we get to the 1900s, it's based on the instrumental record. So this brown curve here is the proxy and instrumental record. And I'll show you here in a minute, the 1950s drought is the biggest one we have in the instrumental record. But going back, there are bigger droughts than the 1950s droughts. In fact, here around almost the entire 12th century saw one continuous mega drought, a drought more than 10 years we call a mega drought. And this actually led to the demise, the anthropologists maintain, that this extended drought led to the demise of the ancestral Puebloan civilization, formerly known as the Anasazi, in the Four Corners region of the Southwest US. A remarkable civilization abandoned after centuries of prosperity. Now, what's shown in colors here are the model projections. 17 of the different models that are used by different laboratories climate research laboratories around the world, all taken here and averaged together. And the gray bars show the interquartile uncertainty. So it's basically showing how well the models agree or don't agree. First thing I'll say about models is a favorite expression I've heard. All models are wrong, some are useful, right? No model gets it 100%. No model can get the complexity of nature 100%. But if we look at all the models which have different components, different theoretical concepts put into them, and some more uncertain than others, what we could see is that there's an agreement between all of them in this dramatic drop-off over the 21st century in terms of shifting us from a regime of occasionally in drought to a regime of permanently in drought. And why is this unprecedented? Well, let's go back 1,000 years. What's the worst case model? What's the worst case observation of past climate change in terms of drought? It's probably this one back here in the 1100s. We draw a line from what that level of drought index is. You can see that we're already at or passing it, according to the models. Let's put this into some perspective. Look at this dip here, this extended drought. This was a 6-year drought in the 1950s. And this is used by our state for planning purposes. The Texas Water Development Board is charged with making sure there's water for all Texans 50 years out into the future. And they use as a worst case scenario saying, if this worst case should reoccur, we need to be ready for it. That's what's used as the drought of record or the worst case scenario for planning purposes. And I think it gives you some perspective that if our state had a wider scope or wider view, they would look at the proxy records and they would look at the model projections. And I would ask the question, using this as the worst case scenario, this 1950s drought, is this sufficiently planning for the resilience of our state? What are the costs of climate change in Texas? There's a lot of ways to compute this. I'll just show you one way or a couple of ways to do that. So here we look at drought period, we look at drought length, and we look at the costs. So the drought period I showed you earlier is just a few years of the 2011 drought, 8.7 billion. That's calculated exclusively on losses due to agricultural failure, crop loss, and livestock loss, right? Add those two together, you get 8.7 billion was lost the first year of that drought. That 1950s drought in today's dollars cost us, the state, 3.5 billion a year. So not quite as intense as the 2011 drought. And then there's the loss of a civilization due to that multi-decadal drought that we saw in the proxy record. What price can one put on the loss of a civilization? I'm not sure. I'm not a historical economist. And then projected for the 21st century is this multi-decadal drought. Remember, those are the multicolored lines of the drought, the models all going downward, right? What costs can you put on that? Has not been computed yet. Let me put another wrinkle on this and how we can determine costs of these events. As I said, this value, 8.7 billion, is just from livestock and crop loss. There are a lot of other factors involved. There was loss of trees during that 2011 drought. Does anybody know how many trees were lost? 301 million trees were lost. Not just due to wildfires like in Bastrop, but just things that, no fires, they just died in place, they didn't get enough water. That's 10% of all trees in the state. What's a tree worth? Well, I'll be happy to discuss how we might estimate that, because that is not simple. But taking a lowball average will actually lead to $30 billion in loss, just from the ecosystem services that trees provide. Shade, habitat, carbon sequestration, water quality improvement, loss, keeping soil from eroding. There's an awful lot of services that trees provide for us. If you place value on them, you come up with something more like 40 billion, which starts to make it more on the order of a Hurricane Harvey, which was only a 2-week event. But in terms of the loss of property and life, 125 billion. So now these droughts start to become nearly the same order of magnitude as hurricanes, both of which are very important. both of which we must plan to be more resilient because we're going to see more, longer, and more intense of the same in the future. Here's a whole bunch of words. I don't expect you to read them, but I use the word unprecedented, and I want to come back to that. These are unprecedented climate events and impacts in Texas. And there's a whole bunch of them there. These are all just observations. And I'll just categorize them. All right, the first two are record water shortages like we had not seen before. Hurricane Harvey, 2018 rainfall in Austin. Remember, that was the first time in a while we had a 6-day boil water notice. That was before Winter Storm Uri last year, if you remember that. And that was due to excessive rainfall overwhelming the water treatment facility in Austin due to the high levels of suspended solids from all of the intense rainfall. The first time we boiled water since the city's water utility was built. When was it built? 1926. From 1926 up until 2018, you turn on the tap, reliable water, safe water comes out. 2018, it didn't. Because the city's water treatment facility was overwhelmed by the increase in rainfall. Okay, then there is record heat. You've probably seen those records, and you've probably become familiar with the fact that there have been more intense storms. All right, so the question is, how does any of these records, these unprecedented things, fit with what we talked about at the very beginning, what climate science predicts about the effects of a warmer atmosphere? Well, they are all fully consistent with those predictions. Doesn't prove any one of those things is actually a consequence of human-driven climate change. But more to the point, the collective evidence is all consistent with that. All right, and we probably, those of you who were around Austin at the time can remember, this is just one example, the lines for water at Costco in South Austin. And look at the line to get into the store, the shopping carts, they wind all the way around to the back of the photo, they come back and they wind all the way up here. And people were buying bottled water and were waiting on lines for hours just to get into the store. So you could have one of the most basic human necessities, drinkable water. And we needed police to keep order over this. So we might ask ourselves, is this the kind of society we want to have as we go forward? It seems like we're regressing a little bit rather than progressing. All right, so let me tell you a little bit in the little bit of time we have remaining, and I want to leave time for some questions I want to tell you a little bit about what the state is doing and planning for in this regard. So what policies are in place to account for the changes we may be seeing? So in the 81st Texas legislature, which met in 2009, a bill was introduced into the Senate Bill 988. I'll tell you a little bit about the bill, and I was invited to testify on the bill, not for or against, but just testify on. I was asked to come and present the kind of data that I was showing to you. We didn't have as much of it in 2009 because it wasn't quite as warm or as drought-stricken yet, but nonetheless, here's a summary of that bill. It would require 14 state agencies to take climate change into account in their planning. Okay, so these are state agencies like the board that plans for water in the future, Texas Parks and Wildlife, Texas Utilities, all the kinds of insurance, state agency, all the kinds of agencies you think would be interested in knowing the changes that would be coming around climate change. Yeah, and there's just an example, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, Public Safety, the Forest Service, and the others that I've mentioned. The bill would require no new costs. I was unaware of how the legislature worked until I came and sat there all day waiting for my time to testify. I was told to be there at 8:30 sharp and wear a jacket and tie, and I was early, and then it was 6:30 p.m. that I was called to testify. I learned a lot about how the legislature worked that day, but one thing I learned was every bill has to have this fiscal analysis. The analysis for this bill said there would be no new costs. That's right. Every bill has to have this because you're going to propose something, and then all of a sudden the state's on the hook for $30 million a year to enact the bill into law. It's going to cost that for regulation, for monitoring, whatever it might take. That bill might have a trouble, but this would require no new costs. Why? Because all of these state agencies already have, as part of their planning process, their regular planning process, that's part of their charge, right? Every year, every biennium, put together an assessment of what you have to plan for the future. And all I'm saying is, while you're doing that planning that you're already charged with doing, just make climate change one of the things you take into account. So the opinion of many, this was very innocuous and free first step that the state could take towards assessing what the future may hold. Well, I could share with you video of testimony that I gave and that others gave, but in the interest of time, I'll tell you I gave a 4-minute version of what I've given you just now in terms of all that background. And you're probably sitting there asking, well, why the heck didn't he tell us in 4 minutes so I could be out of here sooner? Well, I wanted to give you a little more background to it. And so what were the outcomes of this? Well, there was that bill in 2009. The same bill was introduced in 11, 13, basically every other year when the ledge meets, 17, 19, 21. In short, all those bills failed. A couple of them made it out of the committee, but by and large, wherever they wound up, they failed, didn't make it into law. So there is currently no climate adaptation plans by the state. Planning continues to use for the future the 1950s as the drought of record, ignores the proxy record, ignores the model projections going forward. And I would pose the question once again, is this sufficiently planning for our state's resilience? If you're interested, and if we have time later, I could share with you my experience with federal level climate policy, but in the interest of time, I'll just leave you with some takeaways. Our climate's changed in the past, it's going to change in unprecedented ways in the future. And at the same time, our population is going to double. These will have very strong impacts on many sectors of our society. And we need new approaches and across different disciplines, both academic and in practical practice, to address these challenges. And I'll be happy to take some questions. We have 5 minutes left for questions. And if you don't have any, I'll start with a question for you. What can we do about this? So this is clip art taken for the typical audience that I speak to. And I thought I'd use it here. And you know, everybody's, obviously this is a generic piece of clip art, or otherwise they'd be asking the question, hey, what can we do? We're so excited about the future that we have in front of us based on the data that we can see. And so we might ask the question, what can we do so that our grandchildren won't be facing the same challenges that we are? All right, questions? Yes, Aaron.
Go ahead.
Jay, I have a question. You said that the state is not using the factual data and the research data that that you have pre-1950. My question is, are cities using it when they are looking at their planning for new developments and flooding control? And I know in my neighborhood, the drainage pattern has changed in the last 10 years.
Yes, in short, many cities are. Cities tend to be a bit more forward-thinking than state level. And so Austin, for example, has Austin Water Forward, and they're planning for water supplies 100 years out, and they are using the climate model projections and the paleoclimate records, as we call them. The state, unfortunately, is not, and it's the state that is the ultimate governing body in terms of water, our surface water resources, our groundwater resources. So cities are able to if they can be facile enough to act on their own, right? Because Austin Water is charged with finding water for all of its citizens. And now they're doing it well out into the future. So not every city is doing that though, and not every part of the state is in a city. Thank you for your question, Ann.
John, do you want to go ahead? John Niefler? John?
Oh, yes,
You there?
hello. I would observe and would ask that you would agree that we can't think of Texas climate as separate and independent from the climate across into the other states, or for that matter, all across the world. And so we are simply one part of this. And so our problems are shared by all the rest of the world in one way or the other. And I would presume that is a condition. And you focused on what we might be able to do, but there are some circumstances that are perhaps even past our ability to control. I would ask about the contribution to climate change from methane that has been found to be coming from melting permafrost in the Arctic. Has that been sufficiently taken into account in the calculations for future climate change?
Yeah, in short, that is part of the models. There is uncertainty on it, so that's part of what creates the error bars that we see, the differences between the different models and how they take things into account, such as permafrost melting, methane release, the role of clouds and aerosols, right? In some sense, water vapor in the atmosphere and clouds are, water vapor is a greenhouse gas, so it warms. On the other hand, clouds are reflective and send some of the sun's radiation straight back out. So we don't have an advanced enough understanding of exactly how clouds and aerosols play into climate change. And as a result, the different models have different outputs. But one thing you could see and way to take those uncertainties into account is take all of the models that span the range of our theoretical and conceptual knowledge of how the climate system works. And when they're all in agreement, then it's a pretty strong likelihood of what's going to happen going forward. The first part of your question, John, was about that Texas is not necessarily in control of its own climate, right? Because what happens in Texas is driven by things happening all over the world, right? We are not the only people in the world that put CO2 into the atmosphere. Every single person on this earth has used some form of energy and has put some amount of carbon into the atmosphere. If we consider the analog model of called the tragedy of the commons, right? The atmosphere is the grandest commons. We are all part of the problem. However, there's two aspects to addressing climate change. There's mitigation and there's adaptation. So mitigation is, right, how can you stop the worst from happening? What can we all do collectively? That requires action beyond Texas, but it doesn't exclude Texas from acting. The other part is adaptation. So in other words, if we could project forward what the adverse outcomes from climate change will be, how can we start planning now, building infrastructure, changing so that we are ready for those changes to come? And that regions are really the primary responsible party and actor for doing that. So in that sense, Texas can be making changes independent of others out there for adaptation. For mitigation, everyone in the world needs to be part of it. And how you achieve that is an answer for a time when we have more time to discuss.
Thank you. Glenda, do you want to wrap up the meeting, and then maybe we can ask Dr. Banner if he can hang out for a few more minutes for those who have questions? Would that be possible, Dr. Banner?
Yes, I'll be happy to.
Okay. Glenda, passing it on to you.
Well, thank you. This has been very, very interesting. And I certainly have some questions that I would like to ask when it's over, when we finish up. And y'all are welcome to stay online and listen and ask questions. Have a couple of things I want to remind you of that. Remember the casino night on February the 21st. We're going to box roses on March the 23rd and deliver our roses for March the 24th. And we have on April the 2nd, we have Lions Camp Work Day from 7:30 to 3. So we have a lot going on, a lot to look forward to, a lot of work to do. And so I'm going to adjourn this meeting right now. But those who can stay, we would love for you to stay around a little bit longer, Dr. Banner.
I'll be happy to. And what I've left up here are places where you can get more information or contact me directly. I'll leave that up there as we're talking to.
And thank
Perfect.
you.
I appreciate, sorry. Go ahead, Glenda.
I was just going to say, Anne, thank you for bringing us such a wonderful, timely program.
Great.
I have screenshotted your information, Dr. Banner. I would ask you to maybe stop your sharing. That way we could see each other better, you and the rest of the people. And I'll send the information over to everybody. Thank you. And thank you for staying a while longer. Mac, do you want to go ahead, and then Kit Thompson can go up?
Yeah, Dr. Banner, I'm sure you know the old saying we have here in Texas that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over. And do you see any change in the laws regulating or lack of regulating groundwater, the right of capture, where you can basically take as much as you want? Do you see that happening with this crisis developing?
Yeah, thanks, Mac, for that question. For those of you who are not familiar with what Mac is talking about, right, the rule of capture from Old English law is what for the longest time governed the use and extraction and use of water from Texas aquifers. So you could pump as much as you like, as long as you like, even if it makes your neighbor's wells run dry. And that has been somewhat mitigated by the creation of groundwater conservation districts by the state, right? So conservation districts have the authority to come in and issue and deny permits if depending on how the water is being used. And it has had some success in shutting down some wells. That there was the largest underground well in terms of producing water in the world somewhere around San Antonio. It's called a catfish farm well. And it was just used to flood an area and raise catfish. And it was having a whole bunch of other wells run dry. It was having water quality impacts because of all the waste that was a result of all those operations. That's just one example of how the rule of capture was actually mitigated against. Now, to what extent and will the state fully eradicate that? Again, I have no legal or policy background for me to know, but it seems that the more things go forward with the kinds of changes we're seeing, the more extended droughts and limitations on water, hopefully, the more the state level leadership will come around and make the changes that are needed to policy. I'm optimistic that way, thinking that the changes will be occurring. Unfortunately, there's not a long record of state level policy that could make one optimistic. But I would point to the groundwater conservation districts as a reason for being optimistic about it. Thanks, Mac, for that question.
Okay, Alan Ford, do you want to go ahead? I saw your hand, Glenda.
Oh, hey, Alan, you're still muted.
We can't hear you. You're still muted. Thanks.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Banner. It's a very interesting, if not particularly uplifting message that you brought. But tell me this, given the current political climate about issues that have become politically very charged, what's the status of climate change with respect to curricula in our public schools, both in Texas and around the country? And do we have to look forward to an attempt to ban books or discussion of climate change issues sometime in the future?
Yeah, I think I need a scorecard to keep up. It seems to be changing all the time. There are continuous threats to how science is taught, which I think is really detrimental to advancing our society. So whether it's climate change or critical race theory or vaccinations or evolution, there's been continued assaults on science. And so all I can offer you is my opinion, is that I think that's one of the greatest threats we face in terms of making progress on a lot of these issues. Because if at the K-12 level, if you can't imbue students with the importance of science to explain the phenomena of how the world around us works and how it's the way to find solutions to problems we face, and that if anybody enjoys technology such as this, it's all based on science and engineering or STEM. Until we get to that point, where I think we're going to be continually held back in making progress, because without an engaged, scientifically literate society, a voting public, we're going to continue to let all the seeds of doubt that are being planted by people that are clearly not doing things in a scientific, straightforward, peer-reviewed way. We're going to let that hold sway, and I think that's just going to, unfortunately, really slow up the progress we can make. And whether or not things are allowed to be taught in the schools is one large symptom of that.
Thank you. I will say that we have a grandson who's in his second year in the program of biological, ecological, and environmental sciences, biodiversity, ecological, and environmental sciences at Drexel University. And to their credit, Stephen F. Austin High School apparently was able to educate him pretty well with respect to a lot of environmental issues, and he came away with a really keen interest in the science.
Well, awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. And I have personal knowledge of the magnet schools here in Austin, middle school. I know they do a great job. I just wish those places were the rules and not the exceptions.
Dr. Bennett, can we go ahead and do
Leonor.
2 more questions? Is that okay?
Sure.
2 more? Is that okay? Okay, Glenda, and then John
I'll
Wisser,
take
please.
5 more. I'll take 5 more at the fee,
Oh,
right?
okay,
We agreed
perfect,
upon
thank you.
$100 a question, I believe.
Uh-oh, okay. Yeah. This is a very self-serving question, but I have a condo down at Port Aransas, and I have been really upset with how much it's growing. I mean, I don't want it to grow anymore just because I like it the way it is, but all the people moving down to the Gulf, does that affect anybody else that much? Or
In terms of affect anybody, I'm not sure what you mean. Does it
I
affect
don't know
people?
if having a population, a huge population right on the Gulf, if that makes a difference or not.
Yeah, sure it does. You look at any area that's being developed and urbanized, and you're replacing the natural landscape with asphalt, concrete, etc. That's immediate impacts on water quality, water quantity for aquifers and streams. But it's not specific to the coast. That happens anywhere. So the coast is a very popular place to live. It will affect our ability to provide emergency relief as these storms become more and more intense, and there's more and more people to evacuate and rescue out of harm's way. It creates a whole series of problems. Yeah, and I love Port Aransas too. I don't have a home there. I wish I did, but I lead a field trip for my class every chance I get. No matter what the topic is, I find a reason to go to Port Aransas because there's always something we could learn down there. It's a absolutely beautiful place. I grew up on the coast in New York. I lived for 4 years in Southern California on the coast. When I came to Austin, I was like, oh man, I don't get to a coast anymore. But I discovered Port Aransas, and I think it's wonderful. Yeah, and anytime you bring in more development to provide services and housing for more people, you're going to have that footprint. And until we basically adopt ways to develop new areas in a sustainable, resilient way, we're going to continue to have these problems. And you could point to the large and growing population of the world as the root cause of almost every environmental and sustainability challenge that we face. Because if you look at the footprint of what everybody needs, everybody's carbon footprint, right? You can do the calculation. It takes something like 12 Earths to support what we need in a sustainable way. But, you know, we've only got one Earth. So yeah, I'm with you. But I don't know why you're voicing that, Glenda, about Port Aransas when you could be voicing it about Austin.
Well,
When I moved here at the end of 1989, Austin was a small town compared to New York and Los Angeles, where I had lived before, and it was weird. And it's trying its best to become more and more like Houston every day. So
yes, unfortunately, yes, sir. Well, thank you very much. I think we have one more. Greg, were you raising your hand?
Greg and Norman have been very patient. I'd like to hear each of their questions, if I may.
Yeah, this is
Yeah,
Norman.
and I don't know if
So-
John, okay.
We'll go Norman first and then Greg. Is that all right?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Great. Really very interested in listening to you and have curiosities about some of the things that you mentioned. I'm originally from Indiana, and in the state of Indiana for many, many, many years, we had very heavy coal mining, strip mining that occurred in southern Indiana. And what happened over time is basically they have adopted restoration of the land that they've withdrawn the coal from. Matter of fact, part of the royalty has to go in the restoration process. And I'm curious that you mentioned here about the loss of 300 million trees. And with that thought in mind, I don't know how important the lumber or the industry is to Texas, number one. I don't know what number of trees exist in the state of Texas. But one of my questions was, if we're really interested, what kind of protection do we have? What kind of requirements are there for reforestation, whether it be from logging or it be from fires like we continue to see in Bastrop and other areas of the state. So do we have anything that helps protect our state and that valuable resource that helps to ensure that we will have trees in the future?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Norman. So it's not my area of expertise. As far as I know, there's no significant logging operations in Texas. And how many total trees are there? There's about 3 billion trees in Texas. So we lost 10% in that 2011 drought. I don't know of any laws on the books that require reforestation after events like that, because you really, who can you point to make those amends, right? If they're lost due to drought, which is driven by global climate changing and making this area more arid, to who do we go to for those reparations? A more acute example of this is the country of the Maldives, which is a string of 26 islands in the Indian Ocean with an average elevation of about 1.5 meters. And so their land is being gobbled up by sea level rise every year. And whose fault is that? Well, if you look at it, mostly the wealthy nations in the world that make up 12% of the population, but are putting over 50% of the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So shall those 12 countries with the 12% of the richest people living in the richest countries in the world, should they make reparations, and what should they be to the Maldives? It's a ethically, legally, really challenging question. But I will say, if you read the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the most recent COP climate conference in Glasgow in November, the advocacy is that we should be doubling from what we had previously agreed to pay for the wealthy countries, to pay for the reparations, to pay for countries that can't help themselves and are not using the majority of the fossil fuels, using only a very, very small fraction of it. How can we help them adapt and mitigate against the worst that there is to come? Sorry, Norman, you got me off on a different topic, but it seemed related. Thanks for your question. it's an important one, and it's one that goes beyond just science, that necessarily involves law, ethics, etc.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Greg, thanks for being patient. You're muted, Greg.
Leonore, can you unmute Greg?
One more.
How
There you
about
go.
now?
Greg is unmuted now.
Okay. You mentioned a bill introduced in the Senate repeatedly and it failed to pass, requiring with no new cost that 14 agencies include climate change in their planning. Well,
Right.
I'm wondering if these people don't do this, then what we need is different legislators. And I'm wondering if you would say that voter suppression is one of the main reasons why we don't get the new voters, voting to oust these people and put in some people who will do some planning for climate change.
Mm-hmm. Well, to me, it seems like, right, so how do we, it's a great question, Greg, thanks. So how do we go about affecting change, right? There's lots of things we could do in our personal life. We can make choices about transportation, how we use transportation, how we diet. What we eat has a lot to do with climate change. It's remarkable. I'm not a vegetarian, but I do cut back on my red meat quite a bit because that is like the single biggest component of your diet that could put greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. How you use home energy use, how you use water, all that. Then there's things we could do to bring about systemic change. And you're right on, voting is one of those things, right? You could vote with your pocketbook, you could patronize places that have a stated policy and then places that are on board with making change versus those that offer the same products that don't. And you could vote directly for people who represent you. Voter suppression is clearly a rapidly, recently growing problem in this country, but even independent of that, it should be, to me, it's more, doesn't this make enough sense? Isn't this a logical consequence of our actions? We continue as business as usual, what we're going to be facing, right? We don't know all the details. You could argue with me about exactly what year in the future the biggest drought will come, but there's no evidence to say that it's not coming, right? So given all of that, shouldn't voters of any stripe be able to logically choose people who serve based on their views on how we're going to bring about change for something as important as this? So I think it goes beyond voter suppression. It should be all voters. And you say, wow, how can we do that? And I think, again, to me, it comes back to K-12 science education, that it is just in a very sad state of affairs. We don't put enough resources towards it. We don't value K-12 teachers, educators like we should. They should be the heroes of our society instead of people who are underpaid and overworked and aren't considered, aren't considered to be as important as they are. And until we have the resources and pay K-12 teachers what they're worth, and even more than they're worth, we will continue not to attract the best and the brightest minds to it. We will not have the resources for teaching materials and philosophies and all the rest. So maybe I sound like a broken record. Whenever I have these conversations, I always come back to K-12 science education. And if any of you are interested, some of those links we have at the university developed some very innovative programs around how we get the public in K-12 in particular, but the public in general, more engaged in science. And if any of you think this is important also, I would really welcome you to look at those programs we have. One is called Scientist in Residence, where we partner graduate students in science with K-12 classrooms and provide role models for the students. It's a really cool program. And the other is hopefully one you've heard of, called Hot Science Cool Talks, where we have monthly talks by really dynamic speakers about exciting topics. And both of them are, I think, worth a look by you all. Thanks so much for your attention.
Yeah, I'm afraid that I'm going to get in big trouble if I don't adjourn this meeting. It's gone way over, but we could listen to you all afternoon. This has been really, really wonderful. And maybe you'll join us another time. We would love to have you.
Be happy to. I enjoyed talking to you guys. Thanks a lot for your feedback.
Thank you. Thank you very, very, very much.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Thank
Stay
you.
warm.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.